Hello, Mountain View Elementary School, first grade. I'm hoping, based on some of the things you're seeing in front of me here in this great video, that you'll realize today is a clay day. And I know that clay is one of your favorite art materials. We really only get to touch it once or twice a year. And last year in kindergarten, we would have made a project that was a slab. A clay slab is simply a flat, thin sheet of clay that we sort of decorated. This year, though, we're ready to make a container, and that container is called a pinch pot. Before I get into pinch pots, which you can see right here is an example of one, I want to talk more about the story of clay and how it became a really important art material for us humans. And I want you to know that the story of clay, any piece of clay or a clay project, it has to involve fire. Mr. Bowlby, I at home have a fire pit sort of like this. Looks a little different. But my friends and family sometimes will gather around this fire pit to enjoy an evening. And early humans would have done the same thing. In prehistoric times, humans would have dug out fire pits. So they would have dug a little pit into the ground. And they would have gathered around that fire pit, not just for preparing food or staying warm, but the fire was something that animals that might have harmed them weren't attracted to. So they sort of used it as a way of protection too. Eventually, those fire pits that early humans had, they may have realized that on the edge of that fire, after using it a few times, that the soil had turned to stone. And that was sort of how we figured out that clay was special and different from dirt, is that we realized in fire pits that they had become hard, that surface that used to be soft had become hard. And that's when we really got thinking, maybe we could take this stuff, create containers out of it, and that might help us to store our food and water. And we used to need to move around the land, move around the continent to stay with the animals, which were our food source. But once we had containers and could store food, well, now we can start to build civilizations and communities centered around the storage of food in these containers. So in this picture, you can see early humans gathering food. Gentleman over here is creating containers out of clay. Some people think that the invention or the figuring out process of clay was more important to us humans than other inventions such as the wheel. But I want you to realize that the most important part about clay is not that we can make containers out of it, but that with fire, we can turn the clay into stone and into a permanent piece. So let's get back to the pinch pot here in the process. Now that we know a little bit about clay and how it was important to humans, I want you to know that the piece of clay you'll receive from me today is going to look a little more like a brick, and we need to turn that brick into something more of a ball and a circle. And what I like to do is take the parts of my piece that are sticking out, the edges, and sort of just press them into each other. Eventually, I can go a little further and start to pat my piece to create a rounded shape. A lot of students like to roll on the table. I'm not quite sure that rolling action will get us a better ball than working in our hands, but you're welcome to try. Maybe the parts that are sticking out, maybe if you press those down, you'll start to get more of a rounded shape. But I like to work it up in my hands. And I need you to know the better the ball you start with, the nicer the ball you have, more likely than not, the nicer the pinch pot you're going to get. Pinch pots, by the way, a very, very simple container, doesn't require many tools other than our hands. And that's, again, the first type of container that early humans would have made for storing food and water. After getting a nice ball for yourself, I want you to hold that ball in your non-working hand. The hand that you work with, I'm going to ask you to give a thumbs up and to take that thumb into your project, sort of like a gentleman diving off a diving board. I want you to dive to the bottom of the pool. This step's a little hard for some students because it takes a good bit of strength. If you would need help with this step, please feel free to ask me. And I call this step opening the ball. And really, boys and girls, if you look at this, I've got a pot. I've got a container. I could store things in there. Could I store many things? No. And that's when the pinching comes into action. I'm going to ask you to take your thumb back into that hole and activate your other fingers. We're going to take those fingers to the bottom of the pot, and we're going to begin to pinch ever so slightly. So what's happening in there is my thumb inside is pressing against my fingers outside. And I'm going to turn as I pinch down there at the bottom. And what's happening is I'm taking the clay wall of my container that was thick, and I'm making it thinner. And what will start to happen as I pinch and turn, this hand, the non-working hand, is always working, though, to change the place that we're pinching by turning the project. So I've done a bit of pinching down there at the bottom, and you can almost see here, boys and girls, how that section got a little bit thinner and the shape changed. But up here, I'm still back into my ball. So this is still very thick clay there. And if I had to guess, I'd say it was about that thick inside there. And what I would like to see it be is sort of that thick. So much, much thinner. I'm going to pinch down the middle. So I'm pinching and turning in the middle. Again, what's happening in there is I'm giving a little bit of pressure from the inside with my thumb, and I'm pressing on the outside with my other fingers, continuing to pinch and turn there in the middle. Eventually, I'm going to come all the way up to my rim, but I want to stop and let you peek for a second. I have so much more space already inside my project. Any cracks, boys and girls, that turn up, easily smoothed out with just your fingertip. Again, the pinch pot doesn't take many tools. It's just really our hands. And now that I'm going to pinch up at the top of the piece, I want you to know something. The rim of any great clay project is one of the first things people will look at. I don't want you to do too much pinching and grabbing. We do want a nice rim on our project because it is the first thing that people will see. So just be cautious up here at the top when you're starting to pinch as you go around. So I'm pinching there, pinching, and you're starting to see now that it's really starting to open up and seem a little more like the finished example here. Again, take great care of that rim. If you see that a spot's getting a bit too thin, you're going to want to take care of that and leave it a little on the thicker side. It's also a very delicate place, the rim, easy to crack or chip off if it is too thin. So I'm getting close now to feeling like I'm done with the shape and the pinching and the process of my pinch pot. I am going to take time up here, and as you can see, very easy to take care of any cracks that show up. When the clay changes shape quickly, that's when cracks show up. And very easy to stop and think, I want to really show that I care about neatness in my work, and I want to stop and take care of that edge of my pinch pot with my fingertip. And I'm not going to make you watch me do that all the way around, because as soon as you are done with your pinch pot shape, we're going to ask for 3 nice taps against the table. That takes me from a project that was sort of wobbly to having a flat bottom, and I'll let you peek at that flat bottom there. So now I've done 3 nice taps. They're not slams. I don't want to see you change the shape of your project with your taps on the table, but we do want a flat surface there. Not only will our name go there, but this provides us some stability. I'm now ready to decorate my project with some texture. Texture is the way something feels, and I've got for you in this clear box all sorts of buttons and some of these are beads that have really interesting shapes on them. And I want you to think about creating a nice little design in your project by pressing and pulling out some of these shapes found in this clear box. So, of course, we're going to do this with a little bit of caution. If we press a little too hard, for example, with the seashell, one of my favorite things is the tip of some of these seashell shapes. They leave behind a really interesting mark. But if I were to go a little too hard, and I'll show you that now, it's a really easy chance that I'll go all the way through my project and have a hole in there. So be cautious about your texture imprints. You don't want to ruin or change the shape of your project too much. But I do want you to have some personality there, a little design in your pinch pot to make it your own and make it special. So think about the design there, and eventually, boys and girls, at the end of class, I'm going to ask you for your initials. I'll pick up your project, flip it to the back side, and I will want you at that time to tell me 2 letters. Your initials are the shortest version of your name. First letter of your first name, first letter of your last name. For Mr. Bowlby, that would be an N and a B. My first name's Nathan. I know that's a wonderful thing students try to find out and love knowing. So yeah, you can now know that my first name is Nathan, although you can't call me that. On my particular pinch pot, I would have an N for my first name, a B, which is the first letter of Bowlby, my last name, and then I'm going to finish writing the first letter of your homeroom, which for every first grade class changes, but I'm going to pretend that I'm in Mrs. Simpson's class, so I'm going to put an S after that, which symbolizes this is from Nathan Bowlby from Mrs. Simpson's room. And I'll do that for you, but boys and girls, when I get to your seat and I pick up your project, I'm going to ask you to tell me those 3 letters so that we can move along a little bit better. At the end of class, we're going to transfer our project to a paper towel instead of our placemat. Our placemats, of course, stay in the classroom, but a paper towel is an easy place for our project to dry. Once dry, behind the scenes, Mr. Bowlby will place it in the kiln for a first firing. It's going to come out totally different and be ready for glaze. Glaze, you may know from our kindergarten project, is a type of paint that has a great deal of glass inside. The ground up glass is called silica. And that silica, when it goes back into the kiln, mixed with different minerals, creates different colors. And it's ultimately a very shiny glass surface. So you can look forward to that in the future. But know, behind the scenes, when you finish this project, there's a little bit of work Mr. Bowlby has to do in terms of getting it into the kiln and fired for you. The fire is what we talked about at the beginning of class. And though I won't be digging a fire pit like the early humans did for their clay projects, we have a kiln in the classroom, which is a container that gets very hot once all of your clay projects are in there. About 5 times hotter than your oven at home. It goes all the way to 2,000 degrees. And the glazing, as I mentioned, will come next class. Today, though, for me, and for you, let's try to be very proud of our work, show neatness, and ultimately create ourselves a nice container. I look forward to seeing what you're capable of doing. Let's quickly, though, before I set you free and give you all of these great materials, let's review what all I did to create this pinch pot. I had the clay in my hands. I worked to get it into a nice ball. I took my thumb to the bottom of the pool. I started to pinch and turn at the bottom of the project, eventually was pinching and turning at the middle and at the rim, which I was very careful to do. 3 taps got me a flat bottom, and I was ultimately able to decorate with some texture from the texture box. Boys and girls, I can't wait for you to get the clay in your hands and make your very first container with me here in class. Again, let's try to show something we're very proud of and has a lot of neatness in, and I am so excited for you to begin.